does perception reveal reality? Do we perceive reality? So, which means what is perception, what is reality? In some sense, it's a very simple question, and in some sense, it's very complex and very profound. If I were to really give a teaching about perception and reality, I will do it in a 10-day retreat to really give it the attention and the exploration it requires for us to understand what is really perception, what is really reality. Two words we use all the time. And so usually the idea is perception. This year's conference of Science and Non-Duality is about perception. Each year is a different topic. I thought perception is a good topic because perception, to really explore perception, you have to get a satisfactory answer, delve into the spiritual experience and spiritual origins of experience. Perception, ordinary experience, perception has to do with our perceptual organs, with our sense organs, our eyes and ears and noses and tongues and skin and the inner proprioceptive sense. And that's how we perceive. And ordinarily understood scientifically is that the brain interprets the data that the senses get from reality and make a picture. So even though science in general considers there is reality that is there and we're perceiving it, the brain makes up a picture of it, make up a sense of it. So we don't exactly directly perceive reality. We perceive what the brain makes up as its interpretation of the signals of the senses. And I know there is debate in the scientific community whether there is an objective reality out there or not, and that was, of course, the conflict that was happening between Einstein and quantum theory. He didn't believe in quantum theory because he believed that reality can't be probabilistic. It is here. Reality is. And probability has no place, and he tried to prove it. He couldn't. Quantum theory now is dominant, and now it is also in question. Since nobody knows what it means. Nobody understands quantum theory. It's all equations, and equations give good answers from which you have your cell phone and all that, but how it works, nobody can visualize it. So anyway, now neuroscience has developed in the last couple of decades, and there's more understanding of the brain and location of various processes, perceptual and cognitive processes in relationship to the different parts of the brain. So there's more understanding how perception happens, but it's mostly understood in terms of which part of the brain is responsible for which thing, like the images are in the back of the brain and the sight are in different parts. And usually the neuroscientists are somewhat reductionistic because they think it's those parts of the brain that actually perceive. At the same time, in our universities, we have what is called consciousness studies department, where there's a debate about what makes us conscious, which is understood without consciousness, there's no perception, no experience. And the two contending theories, one of them is that consciousness, which means to be able to be conscious of something, in this case, is an epiphenomena of the brain. As the brain becomes complex and its neural firing becomes complex enough, we begin to have consciousness, and the consciousness can become conscious that it is conscious. The contending theory by Sperry and others is what's called the emergent. Consciousness is an emerging property that as the brain becomes complex enough, something is possible to emerge that is not produced by the brain, but the brain is a conduit or a vehicle capable now for the emergence of this new capacity of life, which is to be conscious and conscious that we are conscious. Usually it takes us to a spiritual experience to begin to realize that regardless of how we understand perception, scientifically and physically, and even in the consciousness studies, all these are exploration of how we become conscious. Spiritual experience adds something else, which is really the heart of spirituality, which is that consciousness is not simply the capacity to be conscious, but consciousness is something in its own. It is a presence. It is a beingness. It is a medium, a continuum in its own. And one of its properties is that it is conscious. It is aware. It can be aware of itself and aware of phenomena. In some sense, one of the primary spiritual insights or awakening is consciousness awakening to itself. When people talk about awakening or enlightenment, you can say, one of the ways it is said, that you wake up, realize you are pure consciousness. You are consciousness like light that knows it is light. You know, luminosity where the luminosity is inseparable from knowingness. It's a light and luminosity, but the luminosity also means self-illuminating, meaning it cognizes what it is. It knows, it recognizes, oh, I am consciousness. And then you realize that the perceiver is this consciousness, that without this consciousness, there is no perception, that the brain, regardless of how complex it is, it's only a transceiver. It's only some kind of a conduit for consciousness to function. And you know, if you get deep into spiritual realization, you realize the same thing about the body as a whole, that the body is a vehicle for life, that life is something that animates the body, flows through the body, and expresses itself through the body, and that life and consciousness are two properties of the same thing. There's life, you know, how evolution happened first. There is, you know, inanimate matter, from that develops life, then life develops complex mechanism, and then life can perceive, and then life at some point doesn't just perceive, but it perceives that it perceives, which is called sentience, until it develops further, until it doesn't only know that it perceives, it knows itself as a perceiver. So that's one way of looking at it. So that's the beginning of understanding perception, is what is the perceiver. Because we always think we are the perceiver, and scientific theory, including neuroscience and all of that, it is seen that the perceiver is the self. The self is what perceives, but the self, even though neuroscientifically is understood that there is part of the brain that are connected with the development and of the self, which has to do partly with our genetics and partly with our history and our impression and our memory and the ability to have explicit memories that become story and narration, and we have a sense of self, which goes with, which has a capacity to observe, which is called then the observer or the perceiver or the experiencer. And that is how most people experience themselves. So most people like scientific explanation because it explains how they experience things. And ordinarily, that is how we experience things. To get into spiritual work or spiritual development is you're not satisfied with that. You want to know things more fundamentally. You want to see for yourself. You want to experience for yourself. You want to know directly. So spirituality is a kind of science in some sense. Just like in science, you have to make experiments and you have to have observations and you have to have verifiable results. Spirituality is the same thing. It is you have to have experience, not observation, experience. And the experience have to have results, and the results will have to be verifiable in the sense they're repeatable and other people can experience them under similar circumstances. So if consciousness is the perceiver, which in spiritual realization, you recognize that I am what perceives. If you really recognize what is it that perceives, it's a big jump, it's a quantum leap in development of consciousness. Because most of us say, yes, I am the perceiver, but you don't know what that is. The most you could say is the body or a sense of identity that has a story and has a history and has beliefs about itself or emotions and patterns and character traits. When we know consciousness as the perceiver, it's recognizing that what I am not the physical body. I am what senses the physical body. I am not the mind. I am what makes the mind happen. I am kind of a medium or a continuum of a living sensitivity. Living sensitivity, almost like a conscious substance, a conscious liquid. If you think of yourself like your whole body is emptied out of its organ and filled with some kind of a fluid, and this fluid is a fluid light, and that fluid light, it doesn't only illuminate its surrounding, the light is also a knowingness of itself at each point of its medium. It knows that what it knows is that I am. It knows its isness. So consciousness, one of the main things about consciousness, is it knows itself. It knows that it is, and that it is also not that it is. Its knowingness of itself and its beingness of itself are the same thing. That's why many of the Hindu tradition refer to it as Satchitananda. Sat means truth or existence or being. Chit means conscious and awareness. So they're all inseparable, and of course, the good feeling that goes with it always feels good. It's the goodness or the blissfulness of the pure consciousness. Now, when we get to perception, we see that perception, when you recognize perception as related to consciousness, and consciousness not just simply the capacity to be conscious, but the capacity to be conscious as the capacity of a medium, of a field or a continuum that has a property or the capacity of being able to know and to be aware and to know and to discriminate, and that consciousness is really what meets the perceptual data. and gives them meaning. That doesn't mean we know reality as it is yet. It's still, the brain can be involved in it and all that. But we know consciousness as the subject. But then there is a distinction that begins to happen, in the sense that consciousness can be an individual consciousness or can be a formless, infinite, pure consciousness. Meaning you can perceive as an individual, you know it's consciousness is perceiving, and you feel I am the consciousness that's perceiving, and you are here perceiving everything, and you know that you are what meets reality, what meets the sights and the sounds. Or you are not just an individual perceiver, but you realize that everybody is a perceiver, and that all these individual perceivers are at the bottom, at the depth of it. When you go deeper into that consciousness, it is the same consciousness. There are not many consciousness. Consciousness cannot be divided, cannot be parceled out. It's not a medium that parcels itself out and gives each person a piece. And that's when we realize what's called cosmic consciousness or universal consciousness or pure consciousness, which is the sea, the manifold, the infinite manifold of consciousness. When we realize that consciousness is everything, is everywhere, and it manifests through each individual as their individual consciousness. So ultimately, there's only one subject. And that subject is perceiving through all of our eyes, through all of our ears, right? And that is what's called, the non-dual perception, or called the unity of being, depending which tradition you come from. One thing important to recognize here is that we come now to what we call non-dual experience, which is the recognition that because now we have gone to the origin of consciousness as the sea or the infinite medium of consciousness, which is called non-local, meaning not localized here, not localized in the body, but it's everywhere, which is, for me, calling it non-local is a misnomer, because to say it's everywhere means localized everywhere, because everywhere is a location. So I wouldn't call it non-local, I will call it it's just omnipresent. It's everywhere. And now when we experience consciousness as everywhere, we don't recognize it only as what perceives through each individual. We also recognize that it is the nature of everything, including the nature of the body. It is what constitutes the body, what constitutes all the physical phenomena, that the physical reality is a manifestation out of this field of consciousness. And then the experience that we have can be in two kinds. The realized individual can experience non-dualistically in two ways. One of the ways is from a located perspective, meaning that you recognize you are an individuation out of this ocean, like a wave that is inseparable from the ocean, but distinct and unique, and from there you perceive everything and you see everything emerging out of this field, that everything is really nothing but this consciousness manifesting itself. And so what you see is that you don't feel that that the light comes from there to your eye and from there it is interpreted through the brain, and then you get an image. That is not negated, but the experience is more like you feel that you are seeing, the consciousness as a whole is seeing, and it is seeing in some sense. The seeing and the emerging of the forms are the same thing. As the form emerge, there are a perception of them. And the perception of them and the arising of them is the same thing, are not two things. That's what we mean, like everything you experience, everything you perceive, you realize you cannot really say there is something there. You can only say there is a perception of something. So in that kind of realization, the perception of something and the reality of something are the same thing, which is sort of reflects the fact that the knowing of oneself and the being of oneself are the same thing. So I could experience myself as I'm walking, and as I'm walking, I'm seeing everything, but I'm recognizing that everything is nothing is separate from anything else. That's part of non-dual experience, the importance of inseparability. There are no objects, as we see it in ordinary experience. Everything is, all forms are the appearance of the same medium. And the experience is not that that I am walking down the hall, and as I walk down the hall, I'm walking between chairs and people. No, it's more like the walking itself and the chairs and the people are basically the picture changing. There isn't really walking. There are no chairs. There are no people. It's all the same medium that manifesting a form that is unfolding. So perception becomes the unfolding forms of reality that appear from an individual perspective as a person walking and perceiving and talking. While in reality, it is just the same reality changing its form. And that's what's usually referred to as non-dual realization, non-dual experience. So there are several things here that are important to recognize. One of them is that there are no separateness from one form to another, just like no separateness between me and you. And the other thing, that this consciousness, which is conscious of everything, is dynamic and creative, and is constantly changing its form. And its changing of its form is the creation of everything. And the thing, by creation, I mean it's instant by instant manifestation. Just like you see it in the TV screen, the pictures keep changing, and it's really the picture changes, but you think there are people running around and talking all, while it is only one, the pixels are changing, and there's only one light that is creating all these forms. Similar to that, because here you are the light. Of course, in this kind of realization, there's a great deal of sense of presence, because the consciousness is experienced as a here-ness, as the truth of what I am, of what everybody is. And the presence is a sense of I am. The I am is consciousness, immediately conscious of its beingness. And its beingness is the same thing as its knowingness of itself, where knowing and being are the same thing, completely inseparable. And this knowingness then extends as the knowingness of the transformation of this whole field. So, from this perspective, you will say, I don't think of myself as somebody who walked through that door. Nobody walked through that door. Reality kept manifesting in such a way that there is the appearance of somebody walking through the door and coming, sitting in this chair, while in fact, the reality is just changing its form. So the person now who's talking to you is not the same one who entered the door. That's why the Sufis call it a new creation. Perception is always a new creation. So each experience, each time you experience the form of the world, they are newly generated, which is similar. I think the scientists last night, they were trying to say, look at it from the perspective of quantum theory, that the waves of quantum probability, they manifest as the particle that we see as the world, which I think it's a good parallel, but in spiritual experience, that is a palpable experience. It's not a theory. It's not a conclusion from an equation of quantum theory. So I myself don't know whether the probability waves in quantum theory have anything to do with consciousness. It has not been proven, and no spiritual person have actually perceived that to be the case. We only perceive consciousness as a spiritual person. We don't perceive probabilities. So one of the ways, as I said, of perception happening is that perception is nothing but the changing of manifestation that inherently is a manifestation of consciousness, so the manifestation is conscious of its changes. And it doesn't feel that there is somebody here perceiving something over there. It's more like appearance changing, and the appearance changing can be interpreted by somebody else as somebody moving. And we could look back at it and say, yes, somebody moving. Now, it is the same thing as the ordinary experience of somebody moving, walking to their car. It's nothing different in the sense the same events happen, but perceived in different ways. Perceived dualistically as the person walking to their car, or perceived non-dualistically as the transformation of knowing, the transformation of consciousness that appears as somebody moving and going into their car, while the car is nothing but consciousness manifesting as a car. Now, there's another way of that non-dual experience happen, which is you're not experiencing things from an individual vantage point. You begin to recognize, explore consciousness itself, the being in its consciousness. So what is it? You could feel it at the beginning, know it directly as a conscious medium. But at some point, you do become the conscious medium more predominantly than the external perception. The subjective experience can dominate so that we recognize this consciousness or this medium as an infinite expanse. And that the whole world, all of reality, is the surface of this expanse. Just look like you are the ocean from the depth of the ocean and seeing the surface of the ocean. And the surface of the ocean is the world. So one becomes then this expanse of consciousness, expanse of awareness. expansive being, indivisible, unitary, infinite expanse that is perceiving its own surface manifestations as the forms that we call the world. So here, we're not looking from the perspective of an individual consciousness, we're looking from the perspective of the infinite, pure consciousness. For me, they're both realized non-dual experience. I can be this expanse that is aware and witnessing of everything that is not separate from me, that emerging from my own depths and with my own energy, it emerges. In some sense, I'm creating everything, and as I'm creating it, I'm perceiving it as I create it. The perception and the creation are the same thing. Here we are, the pure consciousness itself, knowing itself, and it's more than we see, it's infinite. Boundless, infinite expanse, and everything is emerging from within it without leaving it. Emerging from without leaving it means it is the consciousness itself that forms within itself, manifests within itself all the form that we call the world, all the forms that we call our individual experiences. Now, that is useful for realization, especially good for meditation, for contemplation, but then when it comes to living one's life and interacting with people, usually consciousness individualizes itself and continues to be a non-dual awareness, but from an individual perspective that is perceiving the phenomena. It's like you are the wave now perceiving all the other waves, but you're aware of the ocean instead of being the totality of the ocean. Now the wave knows it is also the ocean, an extension of the ocean, and all other people are also waves in this ocean, but it is experiencing things from the perspective of the wave, and that makes possible interaction between people, makes possible relationship, makes possible exchange. Otherwise, if you look at it from the perspective of the vast expanse that creating everything, then everything appears as appearance. There is no meaning to such thing as individual action. There's no meaning to relationship. There is no meaning to any happening. It's just the whole world is a projection, like in a movie, and nothing really happens. There are no individuals, no people, no relationships. All those concepts become meaningless. However, if we look at it from an individual consciousness, we can continue being consciousness, continue being, but recognize ourselves as an individual being. That is the prolongation of this boundless consciousness into the world of appearance, into the world of manifestation, and interacting as pure consciousness with other manifestation of consciousness. That way their communication can happen, and relationship can happen, action can happen, and there is the question of morality becomes meaningful, and meaning becomes something that is useful. From the perception of the boundless vastness, the only meaning is that everything is appearance. There's no particular meanings, or the particular meanings are irrelevant. But from an individual consciousness that expresses that vastness, there is meaning. The various things we do with each other are meaningful. Some are nice, some are not so nice. Some are useful, some are not useful. From the boundless vastness, There is no such thing as good or bad, useful or not useful. It's all the same thing. The complete equality. From the individual consciousness, there are things you like. This person likes vanilla ice cream, the other person likes more coconut ice cream, and individual differences. So there's an appreciation of difference, an appreciation of uniqueness, which makes life have meaning, but have spice. It's excitement, pleasure, and delight, and the changing of the world is meaningful.
It sounds like a dual interpretation of non-duality, just uniqueness.
Yeah, you might think of it as dual in the sense that there is an individual, but it's not non-dual because there's no separateness. The individual doesn't see them, just like the wave doesn't see itself as separate from the ocean. You are still the vastness manifesting through an individual, and you are the individual and the vastness at the same time, but you're perceiving from the perspective of the individual, or you're perceiving. In fact, most non-dual teaching perception happens from the perspective of the individual, in the sense there is a location for perception. Now, one thing that is many non-dual teachings don't pay attention to is the importance of the individual consciousness. They talk about everything non-dual, everything is the same, everything is consciousness, and you realize everything is a manifestation of consciousness. And all of that is true. However, if there is no, and these teachings tend to think the individual is either a fiction of the mind, or that it is a mistake, avidya or ignorance, or that it is a conditioning of consciousness. So we're not able to see the non-dual reality, we see things dualistically. Meaning, many non-dual teachings tend to think if there is an individual consciousness, there must be duality. It must be an ego individual, it must be a separate individual. It is possible to know, and many teachings actually have that, as it is in the Diamond approach, that you can be an individual and still be in non-dual experience. And not only that, that without the individual, there is no non-dual experience. There is no perception. There is no individual. Because this ocean of consciousness requires an instrument or lens through which it perceives its manifestation. If there was just the ocean of consciousness without individual beings, how is it going to see? How is it going to hear? If you say it sees and hears from everywhere, it is conscious, or it's conscious of everything. That means it will be conscious of the galaxies, it will be conscious of the atoms, it will be conscious of the molecules, it's conscious of all the phenomena, conscious of all the thoughts, all at the same time, instantly. That's called white noise. Nothing. No experience. So if you really look at it, either logically or inquire into your experience directly, you will see that without individual consciousness, without the individuation of consciousness, there's no perception. That is why perception is always located. Consciousness is not located, but perception is always located. Always a perception of a phenomena in a particular context. Like right now, you might be experiencing non-dual consciousness, but you're perceiving within Dolce Hayes mansion. You're not perceiving in Calcutta. You see? You're perceiving, why is that? You cannot explain that by pure consciousness. You have to include the individual instrument. Now, the individual instrument doesn't mean it's a separate instrument. And dualistic experience sees it as separate because it doesn't see the consciousness that connects everything. doesn't see the medium that connects everything. It doesn't see the medium, so everything appears. It's the same manifestation, constantly manifesting the same thing, except we're not seeing the medium that is their nature that connects them, so we see there are many objects, many people, many individuals. But when we become aware of consciousness, we see that we're all the same. We are one. However, although we are one, we don't lose our individuation, our uniqueness. I am the whole universe, but I am the particular person that I am at the same time. Now, there are many implications of understanding the individual consciousness. It's important for perception. There's no perception without an individual through which consciousness perceives. And this individual is not a fiction of the individual mind. If you believe it is the creation of our individual mind, it's a construct, as constructivist theorists, philosophers believe, or is that it is a delusion of somebody, or it's ignorance. We've already believing in duality. We believe that there's somebody there who is ignorant. Well, you just said there's only consciousness. So whoever is ignorant is nothing but consciousness manifesting itself in certain location as an ignorant person. There's no person who's ignorant, because non-duality means there is no separate individual. It's always the pure consciousness manifesting as those individuals. So to say ignorance is really what developed it, and ignorance of that individual, the person has ignorance, or it's a construct of the mind. Whose mind? You must believe there's a separate mind. That means you believe in duality. You resort to duality to explain the fact that we don't perceive non-duality. And that is, I see, some kind of pitfall that many non-dual teaching fall into. They don't apply their non-duality all the way through the dual experience. They explain the absence of non-dual perception by dualistic reason. They don't extend their non-duality into reason. But the importance of the individual consciousness is not only that it makes perception possible, but the individual consciousness, it what develops and grows and matures. That's why we have human beings at different stages of development and maturation. And development of relational capacity, development of perceptual capacity, cognitive capacity, creativity, and all of that. And the uniqueness of those developments. Now you see, for me, non-dual consciousness is not the end of the story. Because we have to explore this vast expanse of awareness, of consciousness further. We feel it as consciousness, conscious of itself. And it is pure presence, pure beingness, pure bliss. All that's true. But if we look further, and which is something that is addressed by some teaching, like Buddhism, for instance, if you look at this, what's called the ground of being, they begin to see that the ground of being has a deeper ground. That if you look into the beingness, you realize that beingness itself, that conscious beingness itself, is a certain dimension. There are deeper dimensions to this vastness itself. There are many layers or dimensions to this vast expanse. That this vast expanse of consciousness has an underlying layer, and this underlying layer is called emptiness. And when we recognize this emptiness, we recognize first that this vastness is empty space, total empty space. We recognize it is totally transparent. It is totally unobstructed. And it is totally unobstructed to the extent that it is not even obstructed by space. That the nature, the deeper nature of this consciousness is, which we experience as being, is that the deeper nature is non-being, non-existence. So the existence or the being of consciousness is one side of reality, of true nature, and the other side is pure non-being, pure non-existence. When we recognize the emptiness or the pure non-existence of being, which is the opposite of being, sort of. There is being, which is presence, and non-being, which is absence. The absence of being and the absence of space where being arises is absolutely complete non-being. Non-being cannot be imagined, cannot be conceptualized, can only be experienced. And being or consciousness can experience its own non-being without it disappearing. When we think of non-being, we think of it as nothing perceivable. But non-being is simply the deeper nature of being. And of course, those non-dual teaching who understand that, they realize that the true nature is being and non-being inseparable from each other. That's neither being nor non-being. Then all of manifestation is nothing but the creation out of nothing. Creation ex nihilo. Creatio ex nihilo, as the Bible said. From nihil comes everything. And that nihil, which is non-being, even though it is nothing, it is so totally, absolutely nothing that it radiates, it shines, and its shines is the universe. It shines as the universe and the consciousness that is aware of the universe. Here, where I make a distinction between consciousness and awareness. First of all, I said consciousness is not just the capacity to be conscious, but the fact that consciousness is a beingness, is a medium that has the capacity to be conscious. So there is a subject that is conscious. Awareness is consciousness itself aware of its non-beingness, of its emptiness. When consciousness is aware that is not simply is, but it is also is not. It's aware of its non-beingness, it's aware of non-existence, which means aware of its total, absolute unobstructedness. That's what the Buddhists call the vastness. They refer to it as the Dharmakaya, the body of truth. The Vedanta, of course, knows about the emptiness. Some of the Vedantists know about it. Like Nisargadatta Maharaj talks about, when I close my eyes, there's nothing. I open the eyes, the universe arises. What is that nothing? Vedanta knows about it, doesn't make it into, they don't make a big deal, they don't make it that important. Buddhism takes it as the most important element, and in fact, it debates or critiques Vedanta by believing only in being and not recognizing the emptiness of things. It thinks that Vedanta and most of the Hindu philosophy, they think of them as essentialists or substantialists. meaning they believe there is a substance that endures, that exists forever. While for Buddhism, there's nothing that exists. Emptiness is the true nature of things. Now, in Buddhism itself, there are two schools. There's a school that says the ultimate nature is pure awareness, pure empty awareness, which is awareness, luminosity, but it is completely nothing, completely empty, and it's completely transparent. And when we see reality, non-dual, still everything is non-dual, but everything is transparent. But transparent doesn't mean when you look through the person, you see the person behind them, through them, which means you look through them, you see their non-existence. They're transparent to their true nature. But there's another school of Buddhism, the Rangtong, opposed to the Shantong view, that says emptiness itself is more fundamental than empty awareness. That emptiness is the ground, is the absolute truth, the ultimate truth. Means the non-existence of anything, including awareness, is the most fundamental truth. If you don't realize that, you're not enlightened. And they believe that is what Buddha taught when he talked about emptiness. From that perspective, if you take that view, and if you realize that, which is possible, I think of them as two different, in my experience, two equivalent views, meaning they're both valid. If you take emptiness as the ultimate nature of consciousness, the ultimate nature of everything, ultimate nature of being, then perception changes. There's still perception, however, there's no perceiver. From the perspective of being or pure consciousness, the perceiver is consciousness. Consciousness perceives its own manifestation. When we recognize that we aren't here, we don't exist, there's no gravity. It's complete lightness, more light than empty space, more light than vacuum. This absence of non-beingness shows the way it doesn't perceive because there's nothing there to perceive. There's no subject. So when that kind of Buddhism says no self, they mean that emptiness. It's not there's no self, there's nothing, absolutely nothing. There's only appearance and there's perception without perceiver. There's simply perception. Perception happens. And we don't need to posit a perceiver for perception to happen. Everything is simply pure perception occurring on its own. Now, I myself like that, not that I prefer it over the other, but I like it because it opens the door to other ways of perceiving reality. If we understand the emptiness of non-being, which is total non-obstructedness, then we can go a little further than the Rangtong kind of Mahayana Buddhism, which says there is no perceiver and emptiness is the ultimate ground, which is, if we explore this emptiness, which is the lack of unobstructedness. The way they see it, the unobstructedness is that there is no obstruction between emptiness and any manifestation. So the emptiness goes as the non-being of everything. It's the non-being of the body, but if you look into the body, it's the non-being of the organ. If you look into the organ, it's the non-being of the cells. And if you look into the cells, it's the non-being of the atoms. If you look into the atom, it's the non-being of the elementary particles. The non-being at all levels of perception, there is simply non-being. Then what's left? Non-being. And this non-being is luminous, without it being anything, without being. what I like about that is that the moment we recognize that non-being and explorer, we realize that an unobstructedness is not simply between this fundamental groundless ground of emptiness and all manifestation, but it is unobstructedness between one form of manifestation and another form of manifestation. Unobstructedness between you and me, your form as an individual body consciousness, and my form as an individual body consciousness. That non-obstructedness will appear as the absence of time and space. You see, many non-dual teaching, they say consciousness is beyond time and space. They say that, however, the language uses spatial metaphors all the time. They say consciousness is non-local, but at the same time they say it's everywhere. Oh, everywhere means they're here, there, and everywhere. What are these? Locations. Locations imply space. So even consciousness or being is recognized as beyond space, it is experienced thing through space. There's always space. There is another way of experiencing reality that can be opened up by understanding the emptiness of consciousness. When you recognize emptiness as unobstructedness, then we recognize that the unobstructed means truly going beyond space. If there is no space, there's no distance. There's no there, and there's no here. And there's no everywhere. So you over there is right here. I am right over there. So non-duality is not simply here. We move from the non-dual experience of seeing everything as manifestation of the same fabric to recognizing that everything is really at the same location. I call it unilocality, unilocal realization, which is a little more subtler than non-dual realization, meaning I, as a particular, have the whole universe in me. Each point is every other point of space and time. That comes close to the new model of physics of the holographic model. The hologram, that each part of the hologram contains the totality. But here, the hologram means that it contains the information about the totality. However, in unilocal experience, is that each point is not only not separate from every other point, it is really includes every other point. Remember William Blake when he said, "You see the universe in the palm of your hand and time in an instant." It's one of his poems. What was he talking about? It's an actual way of experiencing things. That the whole universe is really at one point. That's the quote that was put up here about Nisargadatta Maharaj, when he says, you see, when you recognize you are the unknowingness, and the whole universe is one point that contains all the universes. That is a way of experiencing it from the perspective of emptiness. Emptiness is complete mystery, is complete nothing. He said the whole universe is a point. He did not develop it further to see it is a new kind of realization. He didn't go inside the point and see what things are like then. If you go inside the point, you realize that each point in manifestation can be that point. It's not there's one point that is the whole universe. Each point can be that point. That is true non-locality. There's no location, because that point is not anywhere. Now, that opens up another way of experiencing things where perception happens. And we have an ordinary perception, dual or non-dual, but we also have the perception that even though there's dual or non-dual perception, there's a third kind of perception where everything is truly non-local. And that changes action and changes especially relationship. When you are sitting with somebody and you realize that it's not only your two waves of the same ocean, you're not two manifestations of the same consciousness, you are actually completely in the same point. You are just one point, one beingness with no extension. How close are you then? Why do you think people want to be close to each other? What is the big deal about intimacy? Why do people like sex? People like sex, they want to get into each other as close as possible because they want to become that one unity, and you can never do it physically. The physical can never completely satisfy it because it doesn't bring what is called interpenetration, where the two bodies are one body. But the moment we understand that level of realization, we can have that experience. We can be sitting, talking with each other, we realize we have one heart. We don't just share in a heart. We don't just two hearts that meet. We are one heart from the same location. I can experience all of you, and can experience all of us. All of our hearts are one point, one heart. Not one big heart that manifests through many people. No, it's not big and it's not small, has no size. The question of size is irrelevant. Size has to do with space. To say it's infinite, to say reality is infinite, we're using spatial dimension, spatial metaphor. The reality is not infinite. It's not big, it's not small. Like when you're having a dream, it's only inside your head, a little mind, but you dream of the whole universe. How big is it? You can go as big as you can in your dream. Well, how big is it really? It's the same thing as reality now. How big is it? The usefulness of unilocal realization is that it shows that perception is an appearance, but it brings different meaning, different completeness to human life, human relationship. The point of love shows you why love is there. Love is nothing but the magnetic force that's bringing two together because they are singularly one. When people love each other, they want to become close to each other. Why? Because love is basically the expression of that singularity, of that unity that doesn't expand into time or space. And the interesting thing in this unilocal experience is that the distinction we made between the vastness and the individual disappears. I'm a particular, unique human being. At the same time, I am the whole universe at all times. The whole universe at all times, I call it total being. Total being, because being is seen as the now. But the now of total being is the now of all times. The now of all time is the same now. It is, which is all now. So all times are here, just like our all points are here. This shows the importance of recognizing the individual consciousness. The other important part of recognizing individual consciousness is when death comes and the physical body is gone, how does perception happen? What accounts for perception? If there's no, if your individuation is because of your physical body, there'll be no perception after death. Kaput, nothing. Complete annihilation. But we know perception continues, just as we know in near-death experience there's perception, because there's individual consciousness. And the important thing is that individual consciousness can develop and becomes what's called the indestructible body. The indestructible individual body that can cohere regardless whether there's life and death, which can move on beyond life and death as a continuity of knowing and functioning and interaction. Anyway, when it comes into perception, there are the understanding emptiness. I mentioned an example of unilocal realization that can happen, which is a little subtler than non-dual realization, but opens up other kind of realization. We realize that one kind of realization is not that the question whether there's a separation between me and you becomes irrelevant. Things are neither separate nor not separate. I always think of the lizard. When you think of a lizard perceiving things around it, are they separate or not separate? You need a neocortex to have the question of separate and not separate. Reality, separateness or lack of separateness are irrelevant to reality. Duality and non-duality are irrelevant to reality. They're human inventions. So that's another way of realization, to see that separation or no separation are simply irrelevant to really living in reality. And then perception at some point drops as a concept, which is just reality being reality. There's no perceiver and there's no perception. It's just reality. Perception is a human invention, is a concept. It is possible to have that kind of realization. Now, I've mentioned different ways of experiencing reality. The dualistic ordinary view, the non-dual view from an individual perspective, the non-dual view from the vastness of consciousness, the realization of non-duality from a perspective of emptiness, the realization of non-duality of perception without a perceiver. I talked about unilocal realization, where each point contains every other point. I discussed the realization of the irrelevance of separateness or no separateness, and there are many other kinds of realization, different ways of. So which one of them is correct? Which one of them is the most accurate? You see, all the traditions are in big debate. Everybody believes their truth is the truth, and the other one hasn't gotten there yet. I take a non-sectarian, non-dominational view, which is they're all correct. They're all ultimate. Even the dualistic perspective is ultimate. Who's creating the dualistic perspective? Reality itself. Who else? If you believe it's an individual who's creating it, then you're already dualistic. You believe in duality as ultimate. So reality can manifest itself dualistically, can manifest itself as non-dualistically, can manifest itself unilocally, can manifest itself in many ways. So it depends on where we are in terms of our development and our capacity and our receptivity and the influences happen in our life, how reality manifests itself. And it's not the creation of the individual, it's not also a co-creation between the individual and reality. It's always reality manifesting itself to itself in a particular way, depending on its own purposes. So I think that's a lot. That's why I said it might take me 10 days. But so if we get any of those realizations, we're free. Freedom, actually, for me, is not needing to be in any one of those conditions. And my condition is not contained by any one of them. I'm not stuck in any one of them. I'm not stuck in the dual. I'm not stuck in the non-dual. I'm not stuck in the unilocal. I'm not stuck in, and I don't care which one it is. I call that freedom. It's calling freedom or non-caring or equanimity. Equanimity or dispassion about what perception happens, which way it happens.
So basically, last night we deconstructed science. Today we deconstructed non-duality. So now we can start the party.